Hello, everyone, and welcome to Off the Cuff, where the headlines come to life. And today we're honored and privileged to have in the house Dana Nessel. She is a graduate of the University of Michigan and also has her law degree from my alma mater, Wayne State University. I have a whole list of things I can share with you about her. She runs a first-of-its-kind anti-crime task force, which is something very near and dear to my heart. She was an assistant prosecutor, a civil rights attorney. She's also won a gamut of awards, civil rights initiatives, including Champion of Justice Award, Woman of the Year, and Treasure of Detroit, which I really agree with. Dana, welcome to Off the Cuff.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
It's a pleasure. Well, right now, you're currently running for State Attorney General against the Republican opponent, which is Tom Leonard, who's currently Speaker of the House. And you have run a really passionate campaign, and especially in the current situation and our current environment of sort of being empowered to, I don't want to say being empowered to hate, but being empowered to be negative to individuals, and just what we're seeing around the country. You have run on that campaign in terms of anti-hate. Tell us about that, and tell us about that passion that you have.
Well, I think like a lot of people, I was really taken aback by the victory by Donald Trump in the presidential election in 2016. And
as we all were, I think we were all sitting there and going, oh, what happened there?
So, you know, having spent my career working in Wayne County and living in Wayne County, I think one of the things that bothered me most was the very vile and angry rhetoric against the Arab American community in particular. Now, there were a lot, to be fair, Trump and a lot of the Republicans have demonstrated I think hatred and bigotry against a lot of different minority
I think
groups.
In terms of that, he's an equal opportunity employer.
Well, yes and no. I mean, definitely he has, I mean, you could sort of do a checklist, right, of, you know, the Latino community, the African American community, the LGBTQ community, and go on and on. But I don't know, the hatefulness of the type of rhetoric, I think, against the Arab American community, to me, was maybe the most vicious. And, you know...
Well, the Muslim ban was definitely in your face kind of thing as well for the Muslim community. But again, that's not just the Arab American community. Right. That's, you know, a gamut of individuals.
And he seemed to really make no bones about it when you looked at the things that Trump said about it, when you saw his tweets. He was very clear. I think his exact words are that there has to be a Muslim ban until we know what's going on, whatever that means. But you know, I thought about it, and I think about my friends in the Muslim community and in the Arab American community more generally. And some days I just would shake my head and wonder, you know, gosh, what are these children hearing? You know, what happens when they look at the TV or when they are listening to the radio and they hear our president being so disparaging about themselves and their families and their communities? And one of the things I really wanted to do was to use this office to fight back against that hatred, because I think it can be so useful in that regard. And one of the things, as you mentioned, is, you know, I work with Prosecutor Kim Worthy in Wayne County, and we operate the only anti-hate crimes task force in the state of Michigan, and we investigate and we prosecute hate crimes. We have a special victims' rights advocate working with us, and I thought, now more than ever, I think that the Arab American community really needs someone in law enforcement, especially the top law enforcement official in this state, which is what the Attorney General is, in their corner, fighting as hard as that office possibly can to combat hate. And that's a big way that I see this office needing to be used, especially now, especially with everything going on in the United States, and especially given the fact that we have the largest Arab American population anywhere outside of the Middle East. It's our obligation that we have a Michigan Attorney General who cares about this community again.
Absolutely, and I think you know, when you look at hatred in general, I mean, it affects all communities, and the the license to hate, I think, is really the issue that we look at lately, whether it's in Charlottesville, whether it's in any other community where we've had these protests, and the attacks on minorities it has really been a concern, and I think the kind of environment sort of trickles down, and that's what's being set right now. You look at the LGBTQ community as well. I mean, that has been under attack, and the policies moving forward in making sure that community has its rights, and same-sex marriage. Now that is that's being put under attack as well. And what are your thoughts on that? And how do we preserve those milestones that we've made within our states and our communities to ensure equal rights for that community as well?
Right. Well, I think the first thing we have to do is we have to make certain that when you're talking about LGBTQ issues, that we actually include sexual orientation and gender identity into laws that protect people. We do have laws, whether it's the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Law, which is our state civil rights law, or the Ethnic Intimidation Act, which is our hate crimes act within the state of Michigan. We do have protection for race and religion and national origin, but we don't have any protections.
We should have. I mean,
well,
quote unquote, do
right.
At this
I mean,
point.
now it's a matter of enforcement.
Right.
But technically speaking, those suspect classes are included in those laws. Sexual orientation and gender identity are not. And so you cannot charge somebody for a hate crime, for an attack upon a person who is gay or bisexual or transgender. You cannot, if you are an LGBTQ person and you get fired from your job or denied the ability to obtain housing or an education or even medical treatment, there's really nothing that you can do legally without the protection of the laws. Now, there are some things that have happened involving the AG's office specifically in this regard. And, the Civil Rights Commission has tried to make efforts to extend protections where they haven't existed before. Of course, not only has our Attorney General, Bill Schuette, fought back against that, but he's done so at the request of the guy that I'm running against, Tom Leonard. So they're both sort of, birds of a feather, I guess you would say, in that they are aligned against the LGBTQ community, but many other minority communities as well. And I personally don't feel as though those individuals have done much in the way of helping any minority communities in this state, nor does that seem to be a particular concern to them.
So what is your vision going into the AG's office? What would be your vision in regards to ensuring that those human rights basically are applicable to everyone? I mean, what is the logistics in regards to your vision to make sure that hate crimes can be prosecuted against LGBTQ communities?
Well, firstly, so the project that I run, the Fair Michigan Justice Project, we actually have for the first time, we had a case that we did successfully charge under the Ethnic Intimidation Act. It was a transgender woman that was shot, and there was an attempted murder on her life, and we were able to argue that where gender is within the law, which they do mention gender, that it was because that being transgender actually and sexual, gender identity fits within the realm of the word gender. And we successfully argued that in court, and so far it's been upheld. So there's sort of legal arguments that can be made, but really more than ever, I think you have to be an advocate for amending the law so that it's done very specifically. But I think in terms of the AG's office, there's just so many things you can do to protect minority communities. And to me, first and foremost, it starts at the top with having someone as Attorney General who makes it clear that your vision for the office is that this is an office that's used to protect our state residents. And I mean all our state residents, all 10 million people that live here. We are all Michiganders, and we are all entitled to equal protection of the law. So let's start with that. But also I think it's incredibly important that we have an office that offers a diverse staff. And to me, it's strange because there are very few Arab Americans who work in the Office of Attorney General, even fewer Muslim Americans, if there are any, which I'm not even certain about. And it's astonishing to me because, again, having spent my career in Wayne County, some of the very best attorneys in the state of Michigan that I know are Muslim American, are Arab American, and I really feel as though by not having that representation in the Office of Attorney General, firstly, you're depriving this state office of some of the best lawyers in this state. But, you know, just as importantly, you are depriving whole communities of the representation that they really ought to have in the office so that those voices can be heard. And when there are concerns that the community has, you have people there who can say, I know about this, I see it happening, or it's happened to me, or it happens to my neighbors. And there's this direct line of communication to, you know, this very important, this critically important office right from the Arab American community. So that is incredibly important, but there's so many cases that can be brought that I think are essential to protecting the Arab American community. And I will say that I have made it very clear that I have no hesitation in filing lawsuits against the federal government if those lawsuits are necessary to protect our minority communities here in Michigan. And that's why I think it was so important for the Democratic AGs that brought the cases against the travel ban. And many people don't know they were successful in the first two rounds. So the first two incarnations of that, the Democratic AGs that filed suit, they actually won. They were sadly and tragically, in my opinion, unsuccessful in that third lawsuit. And I think that that case will go down in history as one of the most shameful opinions that has ever come from the United States Supreme Court. But that being said, there are so many other cases that are currently being brought that I think need to be vigorously fought to protect minority communities. And I'm talking about the citizenship question on the 2020 census, which we know is only going to be placed on the census to scare immigrant communities into not
answering questions. Absolutely,
not
that
answering
fear
the
factor
question.
is there.
That's right, and has the impact later of these communities are not properly represented then in both Washington, D.C. and Lansing, and they don't get the proper funding. And frankly, cases that protect DACA recipients. Those are important cases. And worse than that, and every day when I think there's not going to be something that is more upsetting to me, something else.
Wait 5 minutes.
Yeah, wait 5 minutes and then it'll rise. But it's this effort by the Department of Justice to sort of reinvestigate the case files of naturalized citizens. And these are people who have not committed any crimes, and there's no evidence that they've done anything wrong, and they are part of our communities, they're part of their taxpayers, they are upstanding American citizens. And to decide that just because somebody is, didn't emigrate here from Norway, who do we think are going to be investigated? I mean, ask yourself that question. Do you think it's the people?
Obvious.
Will it be the Swedes?
No, absolutely not.
No.
It's an obvious attack on a particular community, no doubt, and we know that a lot of the individuals that are currently on the watch list, is exclusive, especially in our cities here, have the highest number of people on the watch list, and the least or absolutely no reason for them to be on there, and of course we know why. But that's a huge initiative that is very unconstitutional, of course, and unfair. But that's the world that we live in right now, and so people like you and people who have a voice are there to say, let's look at this and let's look at it fairly, and let's give everyone their due. I mean, you have naturalized citizens, you have immigration, and the immigration reforms that are happening right now. Or I don't even want to say reforms, but the immigration, horrific
That's right. And it's
application is really sad right now.
It's an effort to take,
but it's blatantly,
right.
It's blatantly, focused on persecuting a certain population.
I look at my grandparents who emigrated here, just before World War II. to escape the tyranny that was in Europe. And, you know, they came here not knowing any English, with very little in the way of formal education, and very poor. And here, just a couple generations later, I'm sitting here, their granddaughter, and may possibly be the next Attorney General of this state, the second highest position, really, elected office in the state. And that's the story of immigration for me. You know, it's people coming here with nothing, making something of themselves, and having the opportunity for their children and their grandchildren to have a better life than they had. This country is not great despite immigration. It is great because of
immigration. Unless you're an American Indian, you came from somewhere, and that's
right.
That's who we are as a country and as a
so we need to
nation.
Protect that notion,
Absolutely.
you know, that so many of us still hold to be dear. And I want to make certain that when the federal government is engaged in these activities that I deem to be flagrantly unconstitutional, that Michigan has somebody here, a state actor, an elected office that has the ability to protect all of these populations. That's what I want to be, and that's what I intend to do as Michigan Attorney General.
You also have some very intricate topics that are very near and dear to you, and I know the environment is one of those topics, and that has been under attack with all the deregulations that have been happening under this administration, and there's something in particular that you're looking at, and that's the Enbridge Line 5 in Mackinac. So, really briefly, tell us about that and how. Did it sort of just go over our eyes, and it was placed there, and if there is an accident, how devastating would it be on our environment out there?
Right. So, you know, of the many challenges that our state faces right now, I mean, to me, clean and safe drinking water is really paramount.
And the thing that happened in Flint, I don't see any heads that rolled. I don't see any accountability for that, and yet, you know, this is happening, and yet we're still dealing with the situation in Flint without any clear concept or any accountability.
Right. So I mean, whether you're talking about Line 5, whether you're talking about the PFAS really epidemic, I would call it, you know, affecting, you know, communities all around the state, everywhere. And every day, I mean, if you read the newspaper, you will read every day a new site that has been located with accelerated levels of PFAS, which are incredibly carcinogenic, incredibly dangerous chemicals that are in drinking water for communities all over the state. Whether you're looking at the Nessel situation, where, of course, you have what I think to be the privatization and the corporatization of our natural resources, or whether you have Flint, in which you have so many people's lives who are still impacted, and lives that will never be the same, never be able to put back together when you have a child that spent years of his or her life drinking lead-infused water. We have some major issues here. And the problem to me, and I can spell it out in a way that's actually quite easy to understand and yet horrible at the same time, is that our lawmakers are completely beholden to these companies. And, you know, whether they're chemical companies or oil and gas companies, they seem to have more power now in Lansing than just the regular residents who live here. And so ultimately you have things like Line 5, which is a Canadian company, Enbridge, that operates these twin pipelines, 95% of which the oil that travels through those pipelines goes back up and services Canadian citizens. So that's not even oil that we're getting, and yet we're absorbing all the risk. We're looking at what will be the biggest oil spill, potentially, in American history. I mean, eclipsing, you know, the spill in the Gulf. And, you know, the AG is in a unique situation to be able to bring a lawsuit, to be able to shut that down, and yet we haven't had an AG that's been willing to do that. And I absolutely believe that time is of the essence, and if I am elected, it will be one of the first things I do in office.
So do you think we've lost those checks and balances that we so hold near and dear in regards to environmental protection? You know, we were talking about civil liberties, civil rights, and the whole 9 yards. Have we lost that checks and balances as a country, do you think?
We're certainly on our way to losing that right now. And that's why this election is so incredibly important. I think the 2018 election it's certainly the most important election of my lifetime. And it is our chance to really take back these state offices. And I attribute this to a lot of things. Part of it is the 2010 decision of Citizens United that allowed really just an infinite amount of money from corporations to go directly to campaigns through these super PACs. And so it's very hard to fight back against. But the only thing we have in greater numbers than the dollars that are being fed to these campaigns from these multinational corporations are voters. And we have so many eligible voters in our state, and if they just look at candidates who truly seem to want to do the right thing and who are beholden just to the residents of this state instead of being beholden to these companies, I do think it's our opportunity to take our state back. And what we also need to make sure is we take our courts back, so we need to take these state offices back, incredibly important offices like Secretary of State, my race, AG, and of course the governor's office, the state legislature, and also the Michigan Supreme Court. If we're able to do that, and we can do it all in one election on November 6th, I think it's going to be a very, very large step in the right direction of taking back our state from the corporatization, the privatization, and the special interests that have really owned our state government for so many years now.
I think it's special interest. It's corporate money, unfortunately, that is sort of dictating our policy, and that's un-American and undemocratic.
I agree with you.
Dana, the huge conversation right now, and we have it on the ballot, I think it's Proposal 3 maybe, in regards to marijuana and legalizing marijuana. Now, medicinal purposes, it's sort of working okay. But now on the ballot is legalizing marijuana for recreational benefit. How do you feel about that, and what are we looking at in terms of a landscape within communities and schools and neighborhoods once that is adopted?
Right. Well, so it's Proposal 1. It was
Proposal
the first
1,
one.
okay.
That's right.
Proposal 3 is the voting proposal, correct?
Right. Well, there's two voting proposals.
And 2 is the
redistricting, gerrymandering, and
yes.
the third one.
Okay,
right.
got it.
Yep. Promote the vote is 3. Voters, not politicians, 2.
And
then,
1 is marijuana.
Right. One of the things that I've had the opportunity to see in my career, so 25-long-year career, and I have spent about half of it as a prosecutor, and then the other half doing civil rights work, but also doing criminal defense work, a lot of it for indigent defendants. And for me personally, because I have been so deeply involved in the criminal justice system, I really believe that the war on marijuana has been an abject failure. I see many more people who seem to be harmed by the criminal codes pertaining to marijuana than really helped right now. And yet it's still out there, right? So it's still out there, but there's a black market, so you have lots of gang warfare and people being murdered over the manufacturing and distribution of marijuana.
Almost like prohibition back in the day.
It is in many ways. And you have this strange time where we have the legalization of medical marijuana, which I am a strong proponent of because I know a lot of people that successfully use medical marijuana for a variety of important ailments. A young woman from Dearborn that I'm friends with who struggled with epilepsy for many years.
Zahra Abbas.
Yeah,
She's actually been on this show.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Talking about her experience.
And you see that it's been life-changing for her, right? But has. I don't want people who are using medication to have to be concerned about being arrested, and it's this weird, murky place that we're in. And I just strongly feel as though if we go ahead and we legalize recreational marijuana, but we do what we do with alcohol, right? We regulate it, we tax it, that we'll have a better means of controlling it, we'll eliminate the black market, we'll frankly pump a lot of money from the taxation into our schools and fixing our roads and into municipalities and into counties. And frankly, some of that money goes to help veterans who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. That there's a variety of places that money's going to go, but this way we can better regulate the product, and we won't be spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year having to test it and investigate those cases and prosecute people, and, you know, really ruining a lot of people's lives for a product that is legal in many places all over the country now.
What do you say to those voices within the school districts, and, you know, of course the DARE program, you know, just say no to drugs, and, you know, they all these programs that, you know, they take the kids through, and then we as a state, as a country, legalize a drug called marijuana. So how do we, I mean, obviously there's the other drugs too that are the hardcore and what have you, and we want to continue, you know, that message that those are, you know, extremely dangerous and life-threatening. But how do you sort of create that balance and that boundary between what we're doing as a state in legalizing marijuana and then talking about the other drugs? Well, you know, if you're legalizing marijuana, how do we believe you that these drugs are life-threatening?
Well, I will say that I just see such a strong difference between marijuana and heroin or crystal methamphetamines, excuse me, and cocaine. I mean, these are very serious, very dangerous drugs. Marijuana, I don't believe, belongs in the same class, and it's frustrating to me to see that it's a Schedule I drug classified federally, which means you can't even do, you know, scientific and medical experiments with it the way you ought to be able to do that. So, you know, I think we have to treat it exactly like alcohol. No one who is below the age of 21 ought to have the ability to, you know, to consume marijuana, just the same way that anybody shouldn't be drinking alcohol below that age. But I do think that we have to retool our thinking on marijuana and see it the same way as alcohol, and treat it that way when it comes to children as well. You know, kids should never be consuming this. That's not good for them, but neither is vodka.
And neither's, oh, exactly. And just a really quick recap on that. If you told me 2 years ago I would be okay in advocating for this, I would have told you absolutely not. But I've been educating myself as well, and I actually had Zahra Abbas, I had Anquinette Jameson, who is an anchor on Channel 7 here, with Dr. Barkley, who is at Henry Ford Hospital in neurology department, and just the information in regards to medicinal and how it just changed both of their lives. I mean, Anquinette was in a wheelchair, and she switched from her $90,000 drug charge every year to just taking that, and it really changed her life. So,
and I have family members that have some significant issues, and we're doing so poorly on their prescribed medication, and switched to medical marijuana. And my family members, they are not junkies, they're not drug addicts, they're taking their medicine is what they're doing. And
it's been something that's been used for centuries until it was vilified for certain reasons. That is another show.
Yeah, we could talk about that for a long time too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I know that your heart's in the right place, your mind is in the right place, and when I had watched you speak, you were as passionate as can be, and you really, really, really spoke to what really needs to be done in our country and especially in our state. And having someone that looks at the real issues and puts citizens first is really going to be advantageous to every single citizen in Michigan. So I wish you good luck in this race. Miss Dana Nessel, the next candidate for the next Attorney General for the state of Michigan. Thank you so much
for having me.
Thank
I really
you.
Appreciate it.
And thank you all for being here on Off the Cuff. And please, please, please go out to vote November 6th.